essentially. He'd taken x-rays, he'd checked them, he'd cleaned them. I went to Japan, and I kept the same techniques and methodologies that I'd used that had kept my teeth clean and without cavity. And somehow, when I got back from Japan, some rat, I think, wanted money. More so than to fix teeth. And there are a lot of ways you can go about doing this. It depends. Well, actually, let's talk about the scrupulous and the unscrupulous with regards to dentistry. With dentistry, generally speaking, you have a person looking into your open mouth. You may or may not feel any pain prior to that point, but generally speaking, a dentist has a lot of free will, and depending upon how they're running the show, they have the option of introducing certain things that otherwise wouldn't be there, on top of cleaning. And obviously, you don't just add a mint flavor and one thing goes one way and one thing goes another, because there was no way that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or so teeth needed to be drilled and or patched. That seems highly, highly unlikely. And so that's probably the biggest cause of problems for everyone who has caused me issue in the last 5 years. Because, well, I have to pay it back at some point. So says the golden rule. And, well, if you know someone's doing something wrong and you don't point it out or otherwise say anything, hopefully you're doing the right thing, right? Otherwise, you're doing the wrong thing. Now, when it comes to dentistry and mint-flavored whatever, generally speaking, it would not be all that hard for anyone who is even moderately skilled, I'll say. Even for some who are just moderately skilled in certain practices, it would not be at all hard to find either enzymes or chemicals of various sort, including acids, to go ahead and, well, do whatever you'd like. Alternatively, my teeth just started rotting really, really fast when I was in Japan, and hadn't until I'd gone to Japan, which is a curiosity in and of itself, because I had no feelings of cavity, no pain, no sensitivity, etc. Then I'd gone to the dentist, and apparently my teeth looked fine to the dental hygienist who had taken the x-rays. But the next visit, when I saw the dentist, she wanted to start drilling. And, well, because of a certain special position that I hold in certain things, I said, okay, let's see what happens. Because why not, you know? And, well, I'm glad I did it. Because the do unto others as you would have them do unto you principle is very important when it comes to everything. In fact, I compared it to the keystone today. The keystone in any specific archway or arc. Essentially, whenever you have that kind of curvature, it is oftentimes the keystone that's placed last, from my understanding, among other things. There's significance to it, but generally speaking, the whole structure without 1 or 2 stones falls apart with very little effort. Whereas if it has this particular setup and or these keystones in place, the risk of collapse is very, very, very low. So the golden rule I compared to a keystone in, well, everything when it comes to people. You have your foundation. Your foundation is set oftentimes in the basis of your faith. And so when I was talking to my dad earlier today, I said that if anyone would like to, say if they're Christian, read into other texts besides, well, those of Christianity, firstly, your best bet is to go ahead and read the Bible. Make sure you've read the Bible first. if you've faith and belief, because essentially you're building your foundation, you're setting it, and then you're good to go. Then go ahead and ask somebody in your professed faith, whatever your background is, ask them about reading various other texts, etc. Have a conversation with them, because they'll oftentimes have an understanding and or an idea as to whether or not you can handle various other texts and or what to look into, because oftentimes they've already looked into these things, and well, that's why they're in that position in front of a pulpit generally, and you're in the bleachers essentially. So yeah, definitely ask someone with authority, to say the very least, first. It's a good idea for most people versus to just go on their own, because oddly, that's where a lot of people get lost, and lost in a lot of notions. They'll see a lot of parallels, they'll see a lot of differences. And then you've also got the pull of science, which is beautiful science. And so you end up with a very curious situation for many, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing because, well, science and any number of other things help divide people. It's easier, and you can ask anyone who designs any kind of machine or anything else, it's easier if you have things that self-divide. Because when things self-divide, when you have like a shaking apparatus, and certain products go one way, and another kind of product goes another way, then generally speaking, you have a lot less work to do by hand or otherwise. So when people are self-dividing, it's very assistive. We get a lot done, it takes a lot less time, and it's good. So that's why science is a very valuable thing. You'll have some who will go into science, some who will observe science, and some who will just like to speak about things. And for those who go into science, they'll split into usually 3 different groups. 1, people who gain distaste for science, although this is a very limited group, and it's just kind of weird. And then they just fall right back to religion, and religion alone, their faith. Then you have another group who does the exact opposite. They come to find science, and then suddenly faith, God, etc. seems impossible. And perhaps that's the reason why the imams at a certain time, as mentioned by Neil deGrasse Tyson in his speech on scientific progress, etc., perhaps that's why they tried to move people back to a more simpler way. Not so much as a punishment or anything else. Maybe the people in the area were completely benign, and they wouldn't have started large massacring forces on the world had they been allowed to continue with scientific movement. Or perhaps the idea was to keep them faithful, because people are more faithful when they have less things thrown their way. That is, it's easier for people to be faithful when they have a nice, easy life. And I think that's the whole book of Job right there, essentially, where you have Job, who had a nice, seemingly beautiful life going on. And then Satan said to God, yeah, I bet you he'll change if you just go ahead and make his life hellish. And God was like, psh, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. It's very unlikely. So you have the whole book from that point on and how it goes on and yada, yada, yada. Job didn't change. Satan looked as though he lost his bet, and depending upon what he bet, well, that's what you get. In any case, the scientific groups divide themselves, and science, being a very strong divider because it's based upon a lot of logic, actually all logic generally speaking if you're doing it right, if you don't have a foundation in faith already, you can easily get swept away. Furthermore, if you have certain teachers versus others, you're going to end up getting into a conundrum of sorts. as they will say, psh, this faith stuff, what is it? This doesn't make any sense. It was a big bang and this, that, and the other thing. And that's perfectly fine. Because then I would ask, what made the Big Bang? And then, of course, there would be theory on that. And even the Big Bang, for all the supposed evidence we have, and all the actual evidence we have, is still only theoretical. Until it's observed, you can't state the Big Bang is what happened. Furthermore, we know that there are any number of ways, with mirrors, etc., to go about causing one notion versus another to become, well, seeming fact. Further still, we know in the 1980s, scientists were being paid off to say that cigarettes did not cause cancer or other effects that were negative to health. And that there is a very bad, bad, bad thing. The reason it's bad is simple. The simplicity comes from the fact that if scientists can be paid off to defend cigarette companies, and clearly whomever those scientists were didn't have very strong moral or ethical backbones, well, that's where we get to a bit of a conundrum. In that if somebody's going to do something for money versus for fact, and then also claim that they're scientists, how many other times does that happen where we don't find out? Where it's not related to cigarette companies, etc. Do you follow? In other words, there's any number of things that we know to be true, there's any number of things we don't know to be true, and science is, well, without faith, a very, very concerning thing. Especially if people also lack morals or ethics. God forbid they lack ethics and they're in science. You don't end up with Frankenstein's monster so much as you end up in today's day and age with, well, a new virus or some sort of other stuff that is not on course or otherwise established for a good purpose. And I say on course or otherwise with a purpose because we have used any number of techniques to solve problems. For example, there is an island around Maine and Prince Edward Island, I believe, and there was an issue with feral cats, so they introduced feline aids. The issue with feral cats was gone in a number of years. Very fast. So it's not as though we don't use these things to solve problems when we have problems that are otherwise seemingly unsolvable. By the way, they didn't just kill the cats because they didn't like cats. The cats were ruining the wildlife. Prior to man coming to that particular island and introducing rats, there were ample birds. After the ample birds, the rats started ruining the habitat, and things were declining for the birds as well as, well, wildlife in general. They introduced the cats to eat the rats. The cats ate the rats and reproduced with great fecundity. And then after that, well, they started eating the birds as well. Or maybe they were eating a bit of both. And they needed to do something because, well, it was ruining the habitat area. Birds are a lot more important than some of us mistake them to not be, I guess, would be the right way to say it. That is, the birds that you see flying about and eating berries and doing this, that, and the other thing. I mean, they're transporting seeds, for starters, all over the place. Not to mention, if you've ever seen a bird in your yard after you've cut the grass, presuming you don't use pesticides, you'll probably see them picking at the grass. And oftentimes, they're not eating the seeds of the grass, but they're eating the insects that are dispersed throughout the grass. So anyway, there's this third group, and that third group falls in between the two. The third group is by far the most valuable. It's also one of the ones that's kind of shaky. The third group involves those who have